The mystery of the disappeared socialite in Savannah, 1892. On the sweltering morning of the 22nd of August, 1892, the staff at the magnificent DeSoto Hotel in Savannah, Georgia, discovered something that would haunt the city's elite for decades to come. Room 412, reserved indefinitely for one of the South's most elegant and influential ladies, now stood empty, the silk curtains still partially drawn, shielding the room from the harsh morning sun. The champagne glasses from the previous evening's private gathering remained untouched on the marble table, and a half-written letter bearing no signature was abandoned on the mahogany desk. Charlotte Duval, the woman who had once commanded the attention of senators and industrial titans, had vanished into the August fog, leaving behind only the faint scent of French perfume and a mystery that authorities would spend the next 40 years trying to solve. What they discovered in their investigation would shake the foundations of high society and reveal secrets so damaging that 4 prominent families paid handsomely to have the police records sealed. Before we continue with the story of Charlotte Duval and the web of lies that led to her disappearance, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like this one, stories they tried to bury, are exactly what we uncover here. And leave a comment telling me what state you're listening from, because Charlotte's story, it connects to dark secrets that may have reached far beyond Savannah's oak-draped squares. But to understand why Charlotte Duval's disappearance sent shockwaves through the South's most powerful circles, we must first journey back to where it all began. In the late 19th century, Savannah society, it revolved around cotton plantations and stately antebellum mansions, where wealthy founding families still held power. The Gilded Age, it brought a new wave of wealth from the railroad and industry, creating a dramatic mixture of old blood and new money. And nowhere was the display of power more subtle yet absolute than in the lavish drawing rooms and meticulously manicured gardens of Savannah. Among these titans and their fiercely curated social circles, Charlotte Duval reigned supreme. Born Charlotte Elise Beaumont, she possessed the rare combination of an old Savannah lineage and the newfound wealth from her marriage, which made her irresistible to the city's social machinery. The Beaumont family was one of Georgia's founding clans, while her husband, Nathaniel Duval, was the heir to a Virginia railroad empire. This pedigree, combined with Charlotte's captivating beauty, gleaming blonde hair, emerald green eyes, and an elegant bearing that made every Parisian gown look perfect, had secured her position as the unofficial queen of Savannah society. Her marriage to Nathaniel Duval in 1885 had been the wedding of the decade. Nathaniel, heir to a Virginia railroad fortune, he possessed a calm, somewhat stoic nature that perfectly complemented Charlotte's vibrant and charming spirit. Their Savannah mansion, Oak Grove Manor, featured vast verandas overlooking centuries-old oak trees, interiors imported directly from Europe, and gardens that required a large staff to maintain their splendor. Charlotte's soirees, they became legendary. They were extravagant events where cotton magnates mingled with financiers from New York, where shipping contracts worth millions were signed over fine bourbon and exquisite Southern cuisine, and where a single invitation could determine a person's political career. The local newspapers, they couldn't get enough of her. The Savannah Morning News ran a weekly column simply titled "A View from Oak Grove," detailing her charitable endeavors, her fashion choices, and her guest lists. She patronized the arts with genuine passion, funding the restoration of the historic Savannah Theater and personally inviting opera singers from New Orleans to perform at her private concerts. Her influence, it extended beyond mere social gatherings. Railroad executives sought her opinion on new routes. Politicians courted her endorsement to pass important bills. And it was rumored that even members of the president's cabinet had sought her advice during discreet visits. to Savannah. But beneath the glittering surface of Charlotte's carefully orchestrated life, darker currents were already beginning to flow. The very social machinery that had elevated her to such heights operated on gossip, meaningful glances, and the constant threat of scandal. In the hermetically sealed world of Savannah, where family honor and outward propriety were everything, reputation was the most precious asset, and reputations, as Charlotte would soon discover, could be destroyed with surgical precision. The first whispers began in the spring of 1887, during what a society columnist would later call the season of the poisonous azaleas. It started innocuously enough. Charlotte was seen strolling, alone, in the garden with Adrien Leclerc, a handsome French landscape designer hired to recreate the gardens of several of Savannah's most prestigious mansions. Leclerc, with his roguish good looks and a deep, Parisian-accented voice, had arrived in Savannah with glowing recommendations from European nobility and a mysterious past that only enhanced his appeal. Adrien Leclerc's arrival in Savannah was like a strange wind blowing into the still, southern air. His previous landscape designs, a French-style garden for a duke in Versailles, and the restoration of a Renaissance garden in Florence, demonstrated his outstanding artistic talent. But it was his personal magnetism that truly set the ladies and gentlemen abuzz. With his flowing, brown hair, intense, hazel eyes that seemed to see into one's soul, and an indifferent attitude toward rigid social rules, Leclerc possessed something that Savannah's polished but somewhat dull gentleman lacked. Danger. Charlotte first met him at a charity fundraiser for the preservation of the city's historic squares. She was discussing native plants when Adrien Leclerc approached, and witnesses later recalled the strangely silent moment when their eyes met amidst the noisy chatter. What began as a conversation about botany quickly evolved into something far more personal and infinitely more perilous. Their relationship, it developed with a reckless intensity that only occurs when two passionate souls recognize a kinship in each other. Adrien would visit Oak Grove Manor under the pretense of consulting on landscape design, but he and Charlotte would disappear for hours, strolling under the Spanish moss-draped oaks, or closeted together in her private music room. The mansion staff, trained to keep all of their employers' secrets, but human nonetheless, began to notice things. The way Charlotte's piano playing became more passionate when Adrien was present. The frequency of his visits, the fresh azaleas that always appeared in her room after each of his visits. Nathaniel Duval, absorbed in his railroad empire and completely trusting his wife's social acumen, remained oblivious to this growing attachment. He even praised Charlotte's aesthetic taste for choosing such a talented designer. This blindness would later torment him. But in the spring of 1887, Nathaniel saw only what he wished to see: his beautiful wife performing their social duties with her customary grace and intelligence. But Savannah society, it operated on a level of surveillance that would have made an intelligence agency envious. By May, the whispers had become hushed murmurs behind lace fans, and by June, the murmurs had crystallized into certainty. Charlotte Duval was having an affair. The evidence, it was circumstantial, but utterly damning in the context of the South's unforgiving moral calculus. She had been observed entering Adrien's boarding room on Broughton Street. They had been seen in an intimate conversation on a secluded bench in Forsyth Park, their heads bent together in a way that suggested secrets. Most damaging of all, the Hawthorne family's butler claimed to have witnessed a hasty kiss between the two in the garden labyrinth during an afternoon tea party. The social machinery that had elevated Charlotte now turned against her with mechanical precision. Invitations to tea parties and balls began to dwindle. Old friends became more distant, their conversations stilted. The carefully choreographed dance of Savannah society, which had once revolved around Charlotte's preferences and schedule, subtly reorganized itself to exclude her. However, Charlotte seemed almost oblivious to the changing atmosphere. Friends later described her as being in a state of intoxication, not from bourbon, but from a kind of consuming passion that renders its victims incapable of rational thought. She continued to see Adrian Leclerc with increasing boldness, as if daring the entire city to confront her directly. This defiance, which might have been admirable in other circumstances, only accelerated her fall from grace. The scandal broke publicly on the 5th of July, 1887, in the most damaging way possible, through the morning edition of the New York Sunday. A society columnist, known only by the pen name Gossip Snake, published a detailed account of Charlotte's affair. Under the headline, "Savannah's Fallen Azalea," the article, written with a precise malice that suggested inside knowledge, laid out the evidence of Charlotte's relationship with Leclerc in devastating detail. But the article also contained information that shocked even Savannah's gossip-hardened elite. According to the columnist, Leclerc was not merely a romantic designer, charming a bored socialite. The article claimed he was a man with enormous gambling debts and a history of relationships with wealthy women in European cities. The article alleged that Charlotte had given him $75,000, substantial sums taken from her personal funds, and that several of the Duval family's heirloom jewels had been quietly sold to cover his debts. This revelation hit Nathaniel Duval like a physical blow. His wife had not only been unfaithful, she had potentially been swindled by a professional fortune hunter. The humiliation was compounded by the realization that his business associates, his social peers, and even his own household staff had all known about the situation, while he remained in ignorance. The confrontation between Nathaniel and Charlotte took place on the evening of the 6th of July in the library at Oak Grove Manor. According to Nathaniel's later testimony to private investigators, Charlotte initially denied everything, but broke down when presented with evidence of the money transfers. She admitted to the relationship, but wept and insisted that her feelings for Adrian were genuine, and that she had given him the money out of love, not because she was manipulated. Nathaniel's response was swift and unforgiving. He demanded that Charlotte end all contact with Leclerc, immediately withdraw from all social activities, and accept a period of penance at the family's plantation in rural Virginia so they could gradually restore their honor. Charlotte's refusal was just as immediate and absolute. She declared that she loved Adrian, that her marriage was merely an arrangement for family interests, and that she intended to seek a divorce, an unthinkable proposition in Southern society that would have permanently ruined both of their positions. The household staff later reported hearing loud arguments from the library until nearly midnight, followed by the sound of a slamming door and Charlotte's hurried footsteps on the oak staircase. When Nathaniel emerged the next morning, his face was hollow, as if he had aged a decade overnight. But Charlotte's defiance came at a cost that extended far beyond social embarrassment. Nathaniel's investigation into their finances revealed that she had transferred nearly $75,000 to Leclerc in just 6 months, a colossal sum at the time. More disturbing were the discoveries made when Nathaniel's lawyers examined the sale of the heirloom jewelry that Charlotte had claimed was out of fashion. Several pieces, including an emerald collection that had belonged to Nathaniel's mother, had been sold for significantly less than their appraised value, suggesting either blindness due to love or deliberate deception. The final blow came when Nathaniel's private investigators traced Leclerc's trail In Europe, they discovered he had been involved with the wife of a British baron, receiving substantial sums of money before disappearing abruptly when the relationship was discovered. In Italy, a similar pattern had emerged, with a wealthy, widowed countess. By the end of the summer of 1887, Charlotte Duval's position in Savannah society had become untenable. The New York Sun article had been reprinted in newspapers across the country, transforming what might have been a local scandal into a national spectacle. The story had everything readers craved: wealth, beauty, betrayal, and the downfall of someone they had been encouraged to both admire and resent. Nathaniel's ultimatum was simple and non-negotiable. Charlotte must publicly renounce her relationship with Leclerc, accept a year of seclusion at the Virginia plantation, and agree to severe restrictions on her personal finances and social activities. In return, he would not proceed with a divorce and would gradually work to restore the family's honor through philanthropy and careful social engineering. Charlotte's response was to disappear. For 3 days, she was discovered by her personal maid, staying under an assumed name at a modest boarding house in Charleston. When confronted by Nathaniel and his lawyers, Charlotte presented them with a proposal that was either desperate brilliance or complete madness. She would expose the entire network of social corruption that she claimed existed within Savannah's elite circles. According to Charlotte, her affair with Adrian had given her access to information that could destroy several of the most prominent families. She claimed that Adrian, during their intimate conversations, had revealed details about his landscape design contracts, including hidden rooms containing corrupt documents and concealed safes in Savannah's mansions. More damaging still, she alleged that these hidden rooms had been requested by clients to hide evidence of illegal business dealings, shady political agreements, and other crimes. Charlotte's threat was specific and terrifying in its implications. She claimed to have documents proving that Senator James Hawthorne had hidden evidence of bribery in a secret compartment behind a bookshelf in his library. She alleged that railroad magnate Benjamin Langley was storing forged documents related to government land deals in a lead-lined, hidden room beneath his wine cellar. Most explosively, she insisted she possessed evidence linking 4 Savannah families to a conspiracy to manipulate cotton freight prices. Nathaniel's lawyers were skeptical, but they were also terrified. In the highly interconnected world of Southern business, accusations of this magnitude could trigger federal investigations, exposing business practices that were considered tradition, but were legally in a gray area. Even if Charlotte's claims were false, the scandal of her making them public would be devastating to everyone involved. The meeting took place on the 15th of October, 1887, in the private dining room of the DeSoto Hotel, and included representatives from 4 of Savannah's most powerful families. Charlotte presented her demands with the cool precision of a seasoned negotiator: $150,000 in cash, Leclerc's gambling debts to be quietly cleared, and guaranteed safe passage for both of them to Europe, where they would remain permanently. In return, she would disappear from American society forever and take her allegations with her. The negotiation lasted for hours. By midnight, a deal had been struck, but with modifications that Charlotte had not anticipated. The families would provide the money and ensure Leclerc's debts were settled, but they insisted on additional conditions. Charlotte and Leclerc would travel separately on different ships. They would not contact each other for at least 2 years, and they would both sign legally binding agreements never to return to the United States or communicate with any member of Savannah society. Charlotte agreed to the terms, but witnesses later reported that she seemed different during the final negotiations, distracted, almost dreamy, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. When asked if she understood the permanent nature of the exile she was accepting, she just smiled and said that some sacrifices were worth making for love. The money was delivered to Charlotte's hotel room. She was scheduled to depart for Europe on the 6th of November, sailing from the port of Charleston on the steamship Atlantic Star. Adrian Leclerc was said to have already left for France a few days earlier on a different vessel. Everything seemed arranged for what amounted to the most expensive trap in Southern social history. But Charlotte Duval would never board the Atlantic Star, and the mystery of what happened to her in those final days would haunt Savannah society for the rest of the century. Charlotte's last week in America unfolded with a meticulousness that suggested either careful preparation or mounting desperation. She had left the boarding house in Charleston and returned to Savannah, taking a suite at the DeSoto Hotel under her maiden name, Beaumont. The choice was symbolically appropriate. In effect, she was reverting to her identity before marriage, before the scandal, before the chain of events that had led to her exile. Hotel staff later reported that Mrs. Duval seemed remarkably calm during her stay. She took her meals in her room, received no visitors, and spent most of her time writing in her leather-bound diary. A bellhop recalled that she mailed a few letters, but more notable were her solitary walks at dusk. She was seen at Savannah's significant landmarks, as if in a silent farewell: the church where she was married, the park where she used to stroll. It was during these days that she and Adrian Leclerc had secretly carved an azalea inside a heart on an ancient oak tree, an act both romantic and reckless, which they called the love curse. One afternoon, Charlotte made an unusual request. She asked the hotel concierge to arrange for a photographer to take a formal portrait. The photographer, a man who specialized in portraits of Savannah's elite, later described the 3-hour session as one of the strangest of his career. Charlotte posed for nearly 3 hours, insisting on multiple photographs in different poses and lighting conditions. She paid in cash and requested that the plates be developed immediately, waiting in his studio while the images were processed. The photographer's description of Charlotte during the session was haunting. She was still an incredibly beautiful woman, but there was something in her eyes, a kind of fierce determination mixed with profound sadness. She kept adjusting her jewelry, particularly a jade brooch that she said was a family heirloom. When I suggested she might want to schedule another session after returning from Europe, he recalled, she just smiled and said that wouldn't be necessary. The photographs, which surfaced decades later, showed Charlotte in an evening gown, her golden hair perfectly coiffed, her expression serene, but somehow final. In several of the images, she appeared to be looking past the camera, as if seeing something or someone that existed outside the photographer's studio. On the 4th of November, Charlotte's behavior became even more unusual. She hired a carriage and spent the entire day revisiting locations around Savannah that had been significant in her life. Chippewa Square, where she had met so many important people, the church, where she had been married, the riverfront, where she had walked with her husband's business partners. The carriage driver later told police that Mrs. Duval seemed to be saying goodbye to each location, spending long minutes in silent contemplation at each stop. That evening, the 5th of November, Charlotte returned to the DeSoto Hotel and requested that a late dinner be sent to her room. The hotel's night manager personally delivered the meal and later reported that Charlotte seemed agitated, but determined. She had changed from her day dress into an elegant evening gown of sea green silk, and her jewelry, including the jade brooch from the photography session, caught the lamplight As she moved about the room, she thanked me for the service. During her stay, the night manager recalled and gave me a tip that was far too generous for the circumstances. When I protested, she said that generosity was one of the few privileges that money provided, and she wanted to exercise that privilege while she still could. The final, confirmed sighting of Charlotte Duval occurred at approximately 11 p.m. on the 5th of November. The hotel's night clerk saw her descending the main staircase, wearing a dark traveling coat and carrying a small leather valise. She moved with purpose, but without haste, nodding politely to him as she crossed the lobby. The jade brooch glittered on her lapel. When he asked if she needed assistance with transportation, she declined, saying, "My arrangements have already been made." He watched through the hotel's large glass doors as Charlotte stepped out into the November night. A thick fog, characteristic of coastal Georgia, had rolled in from the Savannah River, and, in moments, her figure was swallowed by the gray-white mist. That was the last time anyone saw Charlotte Duval alive. When she failed to appear for her scheduled departure on the Atlantic Star from Charleston the next day, Nathaniel Duval contacted the police. The investigation that followed would uncover a web of secrets, lies, and unanswered questions that would perplex law enforcement for decades to come. The Savannah Police Department had never handled a case quite like the disappearance of Charlotte Duval. Missing persons investigations in 1892 relied on witness testimony, physical evidence, and the kind of methodical detective work that was just beginning to emerge as a professional discipline. Detective William Carver, a methodical man who had honed his skills on complex dockside crimes and long-standing family feuds, approached Charlotte's case with the systematic thoroughness that would define police work for the next century. The first phase of the investigation focused on Charlotte's movements during her final week in Savannah. Carver's team interviewed hotel staff, carriage drivers, shopkeepers, and anyone else who might have encountered her. What emerged was a portrait of a woman who seemed to be methodically closing the chapters of her life, as if preparing for a journey from which she did not expect to return. The contents of Charlotte's hotel room provided the first major clues. Her clothing and personal effects were neatly arranged, suggesting either a hasty departure or careful preparation. However, one small detail caught their attention: a hand-embroidered silk handkerchief, a gift from her best friend, was dropped on the floor near the door, suggesting a moment of haste or a brief struggle. More intriguing was what was missing. Several pieces of valuable jewelry, including a pair of diamond earrings that hotel staff had seen her wearing earlier in the week, were nowhere to be found. Her personal papers included drafts of letters that appeared to be final messages to family members, though the completed versions were never located. Most puzzling was a partially burned document found in the room's fireplace. The fragments that survived the flames contained what appeared to be financial calculations and several initials: A.L., undoubtedly Adrian Leclerc, J.H., and B.L. The latter two initials initially mystified investigators until they realized they likely stood for Senator James Hawthorne and railroad magnate Benjamin Langley, two of the men Charlotte had allegedly threatened to expose. Detective Carver's investigation took a dramatic turn when he tried to verify information about Adrian Leclerc. The Paris address that Charlotte's lawyers had been given turned out to be a small cafe, and Leclerc himself seemed to have vanished as completely as Charlotte. French authorities, responding to Carver's inquiry, reported that no one matching Leclerc's description had arrived in France during that period. This discovery led Carver to a disturbing conclusion. Either Leclerc had been using a false identity, or he had never actually left for Europe. The steamship records confirmed that someone named Adrien Leclerc had booked passage to France, but the shipping line's manifest showed that the passenger had never boarded the vessel. As Carver dug deeper into Leclerc's background, a more sinister picture began to emerge. The landscape designer's credentials, while impressive, were difficult to verify completely. His previous work in England and Italy was real, but investigators discovered that he had left both places under questionable circumstances, leaving behind broken promises and large debts. More disturbing was the pattern of relationships with wealthy, married women that had marked his career in each location. But the most shocking discovery came when Carver's team examined the landscape designs Leclerc had made for several Savannah mansions. Working with local architects, they confirmed that at least 2 gardens had strange structures that could conceal entrances to basements or hidden areas. This suggested his relationship with Charlotte might have been planned from the start, not just to swindle money, but also to gather information. The investigation shifted when Carver received an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Eliza Thornton, an elderly laundress who had worked for several of Savannah's most powerful families. Mrs. Thornton claimed to have information about Charlotte's disappearance, but she insisted on speaking privately and demanded assurance that her identity would be protected. Mrs. Thornton's story was both fascinating and terrifying. According to her account, she had been delivering laundry late at the Langley mansion. On the night Charlotte disappeared, when she heard voices from the backyard, curious about who might be visiting at such a late hour, she had hidden behind a row of magnolia bushes. What she witnessed, she claimed, was a clandestine meeting between Charlotte Duval and 2 unknown men, tall and dressed in dark clothing. The conversation appeared to be tense, with Charlotte gesturing emphatically, while the men remained still and watchful. After about 15 minutes, one of the men handed Charlotte what appeared to be a package or envelope, and she departed with them in a closed carriage. Mrs. Thornton's account was both compelling and problematic. She could not provide detailed descriptions of the 2 men, claiming the backyard was poorly lit and her vantage point was limited. Moreover, her reputation in Savannah was that of a gossip. She had been dismissed from several jobs for recounting her employer's private affairs. Carver was inclined to dismiss her testimony until she provided a detail that only someone who had actually been present could have known. Charlotte had been wearing the jade brooch, and it had caught the faint light from a window in a distinctive way. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Savannah intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in Charlotte's final moments. The breakthrough in Detective Carver's investigation came from an unexpected source: the financial records of the 4 Savannah families who had negotiated Charlotte's exile agreement. Working with a federal investigator who specialized in financial crimes, Carver discovered a series of money transfers that painted a disturbing picture of the events leading up to Charlotte's disappearance. The $150,000 that was supposed to fund Charlotte's European exile had been transferred to a New Orleans bank account opened under the name C.E. Beaumont, Charlotte's maiden name and initials. However, the account had never been accessed. The money remained untouched, suggesting Charlotte had never had the opportunity to claim it. More significantly, the account had been opened by someone using forged documents, and the handwriting on the banking papers did not match Charlotte's elegant script. This discovery led Carver to a chilling conclusion. Someone had been impersonating Charlotte during the final negotiations, or the entire exile agreement had been an elaborate deception designed to provide cover for more sinister plans. The investigation took on new urgency when Carver discovered that Adrian Leclerc had not disappeared. He had been found dead in a New York boarding house on the 2nd of November, 3 days before Charlotte's disappearance. The cause of death was officially listed as heart failure, but the boarding house keeper reported that Leclerc had been visited by 2 well-dressed gentlemen on the day he died. The men had claimed to be business associates and had spent several hours with Leclerc in his room. Before departing quietly, Leclerc's death had been reported in New York newspapers, but the story had not reached Savannah until several days later. This timing suggested that Charlotte might not have known about Leclerc's death when she made her final arrangements on the 5th of November. If she had been planning to meet him or join him in exile, she would have been walking into a trap. Carver's investigation now focused on identifying the 2 men who had visited Leclerc in New York and whom Mrs. Thornton claimed to have seen with Charlotte on the night she disappeared. The breakthrough came when he discovered that the 4 powerful Savannah families had hired the same private security firm, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, to handle sensitive matters related to the Charlotte scandal. The Pinkerton files, obtained through legal pressure from federal investigators, revealed the existence of what amounted to a conspiracy to permanently silence Charlotte Duval. The records showed that agents had been tracking both Charlotte and Leclerc for weeks, documenting their movements and monitoring their communications. Most damning were the strategic recommendations contained in the agency's reports, which suggested that the scandal posed such a significant threat to their clients' interests that a permanent solution might be necessary. The euphemistic language of the Pinkerton reports was chilling in its implications. References to neutralizing the threat and ensuring permanent discretion suggested that the detective agency had moved beyond surveillance into more sinister territory. One report, dated the 1st of November, recommended immediate action to prevent exposure of client interests and noted that the target's emotional instability provides optimal cover for various outcomes. But the most shocking discovery came when Carver revisited Charlotte's threats. She had specifically mentioned a lead-lined, hidden room beneath the wine cellar of the Langley mansion, where the railroad magnate supposedly kept forged documents. With this information and the Pinkerton reports, Carver had enough grounds to seek a search warrant. Working with federal investigators and local building inspectors, Carver obtained a warrant to search the basement of the Langley mansion. What they discovered on an afternoon in January 1893 would haunt everyone involved in the investigation for the rest of their lives. The search of the Langley mansion began on a gray winter day. Benjamin Langley, the mansion's owner, had departed for his residence in Atlanta immediately after the warrant was issued, leaving behind a house that seemed frozen in time. Its elegant rooms bore witness to the power and wealth that had defined Savannah. The wine cellar, located beneath the mansion's main floor, appeared normal at first. Racks of imported wines lined the walls, and the stone floor showed no obvious signs of disturbance. But the building inspector's measurements revealed a discrepancy. The cellar's dimensions did not match the architectural plans on file with the city. There was an unaccounted-for space behind the back wall. Working carefully with picks and crowbars, the investigation team broke through what appeared to be a false wall, constructed of the same stone as the cellar's original construction. Behind it lay the lead-lined, hidden chamber that Charlotte had described, approximately 10 feet square and 8 feet high. The lead lining the walls would have prevented any sounds from escaping to the rooms above. The chamber was not empty. Charlotte Duval's remains were discovered in the far corner of the hidden room. Her body was wrapped in what had once been an expensive silk evening cloak. The jade brooch that hotel staff and the photographer had noticed was still pinned to the fabric, though the silk itself had deteriorated significantly during the months she had been missing. The coroner's examination revealed that Charlotte had died from chloral hydrate poisoning, a method that had become increasingly popular among professional killers because it was difficult to detect and could be administered without the victim's knowledge. The poison had been mixed with champagne, traces of which were found in a crystal glass discovered near her body. But perhaps most chilling was the evidence that Charlotte had not died immediately. Scratch marks on the lead-lined walls suggested that she had been conscious when placed in the chamber and had attempted to escape before the poison took full effect. A partially written note, found clutched in her hand, contained accusations against her killers, though the deteriorated paper made the text largely illegible. The discovery of Charlotte's body transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a murder inquiry of unprecedented complexity. The evidence suggested a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Savannah society, involving families whose names were synonymous with the power of the South. Detective Carver's reconstruction of events painted a horrifying picture of a premeditated murder disguised as scandal management. The exile agreement had been a ruse designed to provide cover for Charlotte's disappearance. The two men who had met with her on the night of her disappearance had been Pinkerton agents, acting on behalf of the Savannah families who feared exposure of their business crimes. Charlotte had been lured to the Langley mansion with the promise of final arrangements for her departure to Europe. Instead, she had been drugged, imprisoned in the hidden chamber, and left to die. The lead lining, installed ostensibly to protect valuable documents, had actually been designed to create a soundproof execution chamber. The investigation revealed that Adrian Leclerc's death had also been murder, disguised as natural causes. The landscape designer had been killed because he possessed detailed knowledge of the hidden rooms and their contents, knowledge that would have made him a dangerous witness. If Charlotte's allegations had ever been investigated, his death had been carefully timed to precede Charlotte's murder by a few days, ensuring that she would have no opportunity to learn of his fate before walking into the trap that had been set for her. The arrests that followed Charlotte's discovery sent shockwaves through Southern high society that reverberated far beyond Savannah's oak-draped squares. Benjamin Langley, Senator James Hawthorne, and two other prominent Savannah residents were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, while two Pinkerton agents faced charges of actual murder and concealment of evidence. But the legal proceedings that many expected to expose the full scope of the conspiracy never materialized. Within weeks of the arrests, a series of mysterious developments began to undermine the prosecution's case. Key witnesses, including Mrs. Eliza Thornton, began to recant their testimony or claim they had been mistaken in their observations. Evidence, including the embroidered silk handkerchief found in the hotel room, vanished from police custody. Most significantly, the Pinkerton Detective Agency's files related to the case were destroyed in a suspicious fire that consumed the agency's regional office in Atlanta. The federal investigation, which had initially proceeded with great vigor, began to encounter bureaucratic obstacles. Jurisdictional disputes arose between local and state authorities. Detective Carver was reassigned to other cases. By the summer of 1893, it became clear that forces far more powerful than the Savannah Police Department were working to ensure that the full truth of Charlotte Duval's murder would never be revealed. The wealthy families involved had resources that extended into every level of government, and they were prepared to use those resources to protect themselves. The final blow to the investigation came when Nathaniel Duval, Charlotte's widowed husband, announced that he was withdrawing his cooperation from the murder inquiry. In a statement released through his lawyers, Nathaniel declared that he had suffered enough tragedy and wished to allow his wife to rest in peace. Without further sensationalism, behind this public statement lay a private agreement that investigators would later piece together. Nathaniel had been guaranteed lucrative railroad contracts with the government, along with the restoration of his honor and financial security. In return, he agreed to cease all cooperation with the murder investigation and to publicly support the theory that Charlotte had died by suicide after becoming despondent about her exile. The criminal cases against the Savannah conspirators collapsed in late 1893. Benjamin Langley was acquitted on grounds of insufficient evidence. Senator James Hawthorne's case was dismissed on procedural grounds. The Pinkerton agents disappeared entirely, presumably relocated with new identities and financial compensation for their discretion. Charlotte Duval was officially buried in the Beaumont family plot at Bonaventure Cemetery. The funeral was a private affair, attended by fewer than a dozen people. No society columnist covered the service, and no newspaper ran an obituary detailing her life or influence. But the story of Charlotte Duval's murder did not end with her burial or the collapse of the criminal cases against her killers. In the years that followed, a different kind of justice began to manifest itself in ways that suggested the dead woman's accusations had been entirely accurate. The families who had orchestrated Charlotte Duval's murder believed they had successfully buried their secrets along with her body, but the corruption and criminal activities that she had threatened to expose proved to be the seeds of their own destruction. Benjamin Langley, the man in whose basement Charlotte had died, never recovered from the psychological trauma of the murder. Friends and family members reported that he became increasingly paranoid and reclusive, convinced that Charlotte's ghost was haunting his mansion. He moved permanently to his residence in Atlanta, but found no peace there either. His business empire, built on the kind of fraudulent land deals that Charlotte had discovered, began to unravel when federal investigators, working independently of the Savannah murder case, uncovered evidence of systematic fraud. By 1898, Langley's company was facing bankruptcy proceedings. The hidden documents that Charlotte had threatened to expose were eventually discovered during asset seizure proceedings, confirming every allegation she had made. Langley himself died in 1900, found dead in his Atlanta mansion, under circumstances that suggested suicide. Though the official cause of death was listed as heart failure, Senator James Hawthorne's political career suffered a similarly dramatic collapse. In 1894, a corruption investigation unrelated to Charlotte's murder uncovered the bribery evidence that she had claimed was hidden behind the bookshelf in his library. The documents, discovered during a federal raid, detailed a systematic scheme to sell Senate votes on cotton regulations. Hawthorne was expelled from the Senate in disgrace and died in poverty in 1902. His family fortune was consumed by legal fees and restitution payments. The pattern repeated itself, with each of the families who had participated in Charlotte's murder. A shipping magnate went bankrupt when federal investigators discovered the price-fixing conspiracy that Charlotte had threatened to expose. A banking heir lost his fortune in an economic panic, largely because his illegal lending practices, the very ones Charlotte had discovered, left his institution vulnerable. But perhaps the most poetic justice came in the fate of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. The organization that had carried out Charlotte's murder found itself under increasing federal scrutiny. Congressional investigations into the agency's methods and clients revealed a pattern of corruption, illegal surveillance, and violence that permanently destroyed its reputation, especially in the South. Detective William Carver, who had led the original investigation into Charlotte's disappearance, never forgot the case that had defined his career. After retiring from the Savannah Police Department, he spent his remaining years compiling a detailed record of everything he had discovered about the conspiracy. His private files, discovered after his death, contained evidence that several other mysterious deaths in Savannah during the 1882nd and 1892nd were connected to the same network of wealthy families and corrupt officials. Carver's final report concluded with a chilling assessment. The murder of Mrs. Charlotte Duval was not an isolated crime, but part of a systematic campaign by the South's most powerful families to eliminate threats to their power. The failure to prosecute her killers sent a message that money and influence could place individuals above the law, a precedent that continues to corrupt our justice system. To this day, the Charlotte Duval case became a cautionary tale whispered about in Savannah society for decades. Parents warned their daughters about the dangers of extramarital affairs, but they missed the deeper lesson that Charlotte's story provided, that Savannah's elite were capable of murder when their interests were threatened. The mansion where Charlotte died, the Langley estate, stood empty for over 20 years after Benjamin Langley's death. Local residents reported strange occurrences, lights appearing in the windows of the supposedly vacant house, the sound of a piano, and sad laughter carrying across the grounds on sweltering evenings, and the persistent scent of azaleas in rooms that had been sealed for decades. In 1925, the Langley mansion was purchased by a charity and converted into an orphanage, but the building's troubled history continued. Children reported seeing the figure of an elegantly dressed woman walking the corridors at night, and several staff members claimed to have heard the sound of scratching on the walls in the basement. The orphanage closed in 1938 after a series of mysterious accidents that the organization deemed incompatible with the spiritual welfare of the children. The building was demolished in 1940, but construction workers reported finding additional hidden chambers that had not been discovered during the original police investigation. One chamber contained what appeared to be personal effects belonging to other missing persons from the 1882nd and 1892nd, suggesting that Charlotte may not have been the only victim of Savannah's elite conspiracy. The jade brooch that Charlotte had worn to her death became the subject of its own dark legend. After being held as evidence for several years, it was eventually returned to Nathaniel Duval, who immediately donated it to a museum in Charleston. The brooch disappeared from the museum's collection in 1899 under circumstances that suggested theft, but it surfaced periodically over the following decades, always associated with tragedy. In 1905, the brooch was discovered among the possessions of a New Orleans socialite who had died in an apparent suicide. In 1921, it was found in the jewelry box of an Atlanta heiress who had died under mysterious circumstances. Each time the brooch appeared, its owner suffered a fate that echoed Charlotte's own tragic end. The curse of the jade brooch became a whispered tale among the Southern elite. Nathaniel Duval never remarried. He lived quietly in Virginia until his death in 1928, spending his final years engaged in philanthropic work focused on preserving Southern history. His will included a substantial endowment for a foundation dedicated to investigating unsolved crimes against women, though he never publicly acknowledged the connection to his first wife's murder. Perhaps the most enduring mystery surrounding Charlotte Duvall's death was not who killed her or why, but what happened to the evidence she had gathered about the Savannah conspiracy. Despite extensive searches of her hotel room, her personal effects, and every location she had visited, investigators never found the documents she had claimed to possess. Detective Carver's theory was that Charlotte had hidden the evidence somewhere in Savannah before her final meeting with the Pinkerton agents. He believed she had suspected the danger she faced and had taken steps to ensure her allegations would survive her death. Carver spent years searching for this hidden cache of documents, but he died without ever locating it. In 1957, renovations at the DeSoto Hotel uncovered a sealed envelope hidden behind a false wall in an old wardrobe. The envelope, marked with Charlotte's initials and dated the 4th of November, 1892, contained what appeared to be the missing evidence: detailed financial records, correspondence between Savannah families and corrupt officials, and architectural plans showing the locations of hidden rooms in the mansions. The discovery of Charlotte's evidence, 65 years after her death, provided final confirmation of every allegation she had made. The documents revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond Savannah, involving politicians and business leaders across the South. But by 1957, all of the original conspirators were long dead, and the statute of limitations had expired on their crimes. More importantly, these documents provided the key to deciphering a mysterious passage in Charlotte's diary. The coded letter, once deciphered, revealed the name of a secret ally within the elite, a close friend who had tried to warn and help her, and who was the one who had left the embroidered silk handkerchief in her room as a final warning, a desperate attempt to stop her from going to her fateful appointment. The DeSoto Hotel donated Charlotte's evidence to the Georgia Historical Society, where it remains today, as part of a permanent exhibition on the darker aspects of Southern society. Visitors to the exhibition often report feeling an unusual chill when viewing Charlotte's final photographs and reading excerpts from her diary, as if her spirit remains present to ensure that her story is finally told in full. The hotel room where Charlotte spent her final nights, room 412, was eventually converted for other uses, but staff and guests continued to report unusual phenomena: the scent of azaleas, the sound of a woman weeping, and the persistent feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. The hotel's management eventually removed the room number and converted the space to storage. But the strange occurrences continued. A local historian who spent years researching the Charlotte Duvall case published the definitive account of the conspiracy in the 1982nd. His book, The Blood-Stained Azalea: Wealth, Power, and Justice in Savannah, became a local classic and sparked renewed interest in the case. His research confirmed that Charlotte's murder was part of a broader pattern of violence used by the Southern elite to protect their interests. Charlotte Duvall died because she threatened to expose the truth about how Savannah's most powerful families accumulated their power. The historian wrote in his conclusion, her murder was not a crime of passion, but a calculated business decision carried out by men who viewed honor and life as just other commodities to be bought, sold, or disposed of as circumstances required. The case continues to fascinate researchers and true crime enthusiasts into the 21st century. Recently, historians used new technology to analyze the carving on the oak tree in Forsyth Park. They discovered that the azalea within the heart was not just a symbol of love, but a form of rudimentary code, pointing to the location of a secret bank account Charlotte had set up for Adrian, a final attempt to save him, which was, sadly, too late. But for many who study the case, the question of legal justice is less important than the broader lessons that Charlotte's story provides about power, corruption, and the price of challenging entrenched interests. Her death became a symbol of the violence that the Southern elite were willing to employ to protect their privileges, and her story served as a warning about the dangers that await those who threaten to expose inconvenient truths. This mystery shows us that some secrets are so dangerous that powerful people will kill to protect them, and that justice delayed is often justice denied forever. The wealthy families who murdered Charlotte Duval escaped legal punishment, but they could not escape the consequences of their crimes. One by one, they fell victim to the same forces of corruption and greed that they had used to destroy others. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or are there still secrets buried in Savannah's exclusive mansions? Charlotte Duval's courage in standing up to America's most powerful families cost her everything, but her sacrifice ensured that their crimes would eventually be exposed. Leave your comment below, telling me what you think really happened during Charlotte's final night in Savannah. If you enjoyed this tale and want more stories about the dark secrets of America's elite, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves historical mysteries. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when powerful people try to bury it forever. See you in the next video.